Hey everybody, it's me again. Time to get out your phones. I told you about this earlier. Our first poll. If you open up the Bloomberg New Economy app, you'll find a tab called Polling, and I want you to go there now and participate in this first poll. Here's the question. Over the next decade, supply chains will, A, be utterly transformed by geopolitical tensions, B, shift somewhat as critical manufacturing is reshored or nearshored, or perhaps friendshored, C, mostly revert to pre-pandemic norms. That is your first poll. Please participate. The results, will be revealed shortly. I would like to welcome our panelists for our next session, Antifragile, Rebuilding the Supply Chain, the President and Chairman of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, Jin Liqun, Global Chairman of PricewaterhouseCoopers International, Bob Moritz, the President of Bayer Pharmaceuticals and member of the Board of Management of Bayer, Stefan Oelrich, the Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships at the World Bank, Mari Pangetsu, and a moderator, columnist at Bloomberg Opinion, Clara Ferreira Marques.
Well, the nature and the structure of global supply chains is changing, and that is news to absolutely no one here. This previously obscure plumbing of the global economy is center stage. What we took for granted as cheap production turns out to be not quite so cheap when it breaks down. And obviously we're coming today to discuss this after multiple shocks, 2007, 2008, 2011, the earthquake in Fukushima, 2016, the populist revolt against open borders, obviously COVID, Ukraine, US-China tensions, quite a lot for us to get through. The question now is, of course, not whether we change, but how we change. Can we use this opportunity to create supply chains that are resilient, transparent, climate-friendly, human-friendly, or are we really going back to a fragmented and expensive new reality? So do ask us questions as we go along. You can do that on the app, and we'll be able to see them here on stage. And I will start, Bob, with you. We're obviously coming here today after the Xi-Biden meeting, a critical moment perhaps in resolving some of these issues. How optimistic are you that we can create, in particular after yesterday and after what we've just heard from Ambassador Tai, how optimistic are you that we can create resilience without retreating?
So the signs we saw at yesterday's conversations were positive. It was needed and wanted by country as well as business leaders around the world, and it really is the first step of many steps now yet to come. But it does go back to then how country leaders and corporate leaders have to think about this world that we are living in with the enormity of challenges. The three words I would say organizations and countries have to be focused on is resiliency, adaptation, as well as agility, and being able to move and pivot very quickly in the world that we see in front of us to capture the upside potential, but also to minimize the downside risks that exist. Supply chains is just one small example of this. And I would argue, as we look at supply chains around the world, they were fit for 20 to 30 years ago, and they have to be rewired, just like our global economy, to be fit for purpose going forward. And I think in this regard, it requires three steps. First, how do you shore up your supply chains as they exist today in terms of concentration risk, dependency, and multiplicity? Second, how do you use technology, data, artificial intelligence to be much more predictive, to react quickly? Equally important in that, Clara, is to make sure that leadership teams are reducing the friction of information flow in countries or corporates so you can make faster decisions from supply chain all the way down to consumer pricing and consumer experience. And last but not least, everyone has to bring to the opportunity that exists an ESG focus as they think about what that supply chain looks like going forward. And that goes to the point of agility as well as relevancy to the marketplace. So management teams struggle with this, but it's going to be an equal opportunity for them to perform in this space. And we'll start to see the winners and losers, corporate-wide and country-wide. Net, coming back to your question, I'm actually optimistic. CEOs, leaders from countries' perspective at least are talking about these things much more so. Now it's a question of how do we turn the talk into action in the results, and the results to be beneficial to the citizens of the world.
Terrific. Liqun, if I could come to you for the Asian perspective. You know, there are costs to restructuring supply chains. Somebody pays them, and we know that that disproportionately usually falls to emerging economies. You know, how optimistic are you after yesterday that perhaps that won't fall disproportionately to the emerging world?
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say we're very much happy about the outcome of the meeting between President Xi and President Biden. As you know, a few words, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was funded by 57 founding members, and now it's 105. Even though the United States is not a member, we maintain very close working relationship with the regulatory bodies and financial institutions. So the bank's mission is to promote broad-based economic social development for all of these countries and the peoples, and connectivity is important. Connectivity is the very basis for the maintenance of global supply chain. My view is, while pandemic and to a certain extent the geopolitical tension has disrupted to a certain extent the global supply chain, we should not read too much into what has happened. Global supply chains establishment and maintenance is not dictated by any policy decision makers. It's the natural course of economic development. But there's both upsides and downsides. Upside is obvious, everybody knows about that. Talking about US-China relations over the last 4 decades, what enormous benefits accruing to these two countries and to the rest of the world. Downside, because of globalized economy, the widening gap between the haves and have-nots, that is to be addressed by the better social policies. It's not the global supply chain or globalization which is the culprit. I don't think so, but the social policies must be improved to deal with the downside.
Sorry, I think we've had a microphone malfunction. Mario, if I might come to you, you're just coming to us from Bali, and before that from COP. You know, one of the big benefits that we have had of lower costs is obviously that it's accelerated the energy transition. It has made things a lot cheaper. What happens from a climate perspective?
I think let me, before I answer your question, just continue the thread of discussion from the previous two speakers, that I think I would agree that what we need to do is reshape global value chains and globalization to be more fit for purpose for today's situation, which is really accommodating for the need for sustainable interdependence, if you like to use those words. And I think we've seen a little bit of good news from the meeting with President Xi and Biden yesterday. It's sort of giving you at least a bit of a signal that on the geopolitical tensions, which we know have affected global value chains, is there something that hopefully will happen there. Now, I also came from the COP, where there was a lot of discussion, and let me just share you a few key takeaways in the relationship between trade and climate. Ngozi was there, and I was in a session with her, and she said, people may be wondering why the Director General of the WTO is at the COP. So, and the whole session was actually the role of trade in climate change. You know, trade often gets blamed for contributing to CO2 emission, but what is the role of trade in addressing climate change? And that part of it is to answer your question. The first is the role of trade in ensuring that you can have trade in environmental goods and services, including the things that go into the making of solar panels, wind, and renewable energy, and the services that go with it, right? It's not just the equipment, but the services, so the people movement that need to go with it, so that countries, developing countries, can access renewable technology in an affordable way. And a farmer in the Sahel can access drought-resistant seeds so that they can plant in a sustainable way, etc., etc. So opening up and making sure you have trade in environmental goods and services is key. And that's where, all these issues about geopolitical tensions and friendshoring, nearshoring can affect that. And that would actually not be good, right, for the link between climate and trade. Second, you need to remove the favorable bias on high carbon intensive goods. We actually have numbers to show that if you remove this favorable bias for carbon intensive goods, you would reduce CO2 emission. Third, trade facilitation. I heard Catherine Tai mention trade facilitation. Trade facilitation, inefficient trade in the logistics and the movement of goods can actually add to CO2 emission, lead to food waste and so on. So addressing trade facilitation is the third component. The final component is sustainable supply chains, because actually sustainable supply chains is now being demanded by consumers, it's being demanded by companies because they have net zero commitments. So countries actually have to respond to this in the regulatory environment. It's about the regulatory environment, it's about the carbon pricing. And we are already going to face CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism from Europe, where trade will be affected by how much carbon you have in your production, right? So the whole issue of sustainable supply chain needs, on the one hand, it will probably, hopefully, if done in the right way, can contribute to a reduction of CO2 emission. But if it's not done the right way, and it's done in a way where the standards are not able to be met by developing countries, and the capacity of firms in developing countries, SMEs, then they would be shut out of the trade. So it has to be done in a way where we can agree on the standards, and hopefully in a multilateral way, and there's capacity building to meet these standards, and a process to get there.
Thank you. I think we'll come back to a few of the points that you mentioned, in particular food and sustainability, but I'd really like to bring Stefan here to give us the industry point of view. Obviously, we've gone through some very substantial shocks, and a lot of them are due to overdependence. And I think, last year we were here with this panel and we talked a lot about tech, but I think we forget how pharma also has a very strong dependence on China, in particular API production. Can you tell us a little bit about how that looks from a corporate perspective, and how in particular we've seen this shift from a Toyota model, everyone producing just in time, to a Tesla model where people are much more sort of integrated? Where should we be on that spectrum?
So thanks, Clara. When we look at pharmaceuticals, this has been actually one of the good examples of a resilient supply chain over the past years, including COVID. We've often heard about our China dependency. Let's also not forget that China is largely dependent on the import of innovative medicines from the Western world. I would even dare to say at least as much as. What we've seen, and I can speak on behalf of my company, what we've seen that our supply chains have held. That being said, we have about 90,000 suppliers for Bayer. That's buying about 19 billion in goods just through our supply chains. We of course have to create diversification in the supply chain to have a plan B in case something goes wrong. But I was really surprised that even products that were in high demand during COVID, and there was some medicines that were in extremely high demand, we managed to actually keep our supply chains functioning. So this has not been so much of an issue, which sort of like, I think, proves a point. When you take health or when you take nutrition as examples where there's a strong interdependence around the world from creating availability for these goods, then also even political woes or a pandemic will not fully bring this to a stop. Maybe something to learn from also for other industries.
Absolutely. And just on the sort of infrastructure part of this, I'm struck by the numbers. You talk about 90,000 suppliers. I mean, that's quite the supply chain. The AIIB has frequently talked about the infrastructure gap in Asia in particular, but obviously it's a global gap among all the emerging economies. How do we ensure, and last year when we were here, we just had the Ever Given, which was sort of the ultimate symbol of the problem with supply chains. How do we ensure that infrastructure gaps, infrastructure failures, logistical failures are dealt with and are funded, in particular in this part of the world?
As I said, the connectivity and the global supply chain are closely related to each other. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank was up and running in January 2016. It's now 7 years into operation, And we have tried our very best to promote connectivity. But interesting to say that probably this name, AIIB, is a misnomer because we do not work only in Asia. We grow from 57 founding members to 105 based on the international best practice and high level of governance, ESG, and everything. That's why we could have wonderful working relationship with Marine, with World Bank, ADB, EDBRD, because we have the same standard. And we work together to promote connectivity. So that's a very important point. And we do not believe Asia can sustain itself healthily without working in close relationship with the rest of the world. Connectivity means we would like to cut short the travel distance and improve the efficiency of transportation, which also means good for climate change mitigation. For instance, if we finance a road project in Latin America, and that would help reduce the travel costs on the continent and also from the port to the 80 ports in Asia. So we believe connectivity is important for economic efficiency and also dealing with the global challenge of climate change, and we promote renewable energy. We promote the many countries' efforts to net zero. So all this kind of thing is very much important, but I like to highlight the point. The infrastructure should not be defined in a traditional way. Infrastructure covers a lot of areas. It's modern infrastructure, built, designed with high standard, and also throughout the entire life of the project, we take care of the climate change issues. It's digital infrastructure, it's basic infrastructure, and also social infrastructure.
Again, we'll come back to that, but I think it's time. I know you're all on tenterhooks to find out the results of our poll. If we could bring up the results of the poll. Will supply chains be utterly transformed, shift somewhat, and mostly revert to pre-pandemic norms? Well, I think we're all relieved to know that nobody really, or a small amount of people think it will be reverting. Most of us are a little bit optimistic, thinking it will shift somewhat as manufacturing is reshored, nearshored, friendshored. Thank you. There you go. I wanted to, Mary, to come back to you on the food issue and sustainability, which you mentioned briefly earlier. Obviously, you were Minister of Trade in Indonesia during the last food crisis. We're days away from the end of the Russian grain deal to allow exports from Ukraine. How do we ensure that the food supply chains keep moving? What can we do concretely today to ensure that that keeps moving?
Well, the first thing is the actual export restrictions that happen this time as well as last time, which the upshot of it was that it accentuated the price increase in food. In 2008, the food crisis was worse because it was a lack of production issue. In the current food crisis, it was more because of it was also partly production, but more accentuated because of the invasion of Russia of Ukraine. And in both cases, the first reaction was food security. I need to keep the food at home. And then there was export bans, export restrictions. And so we didn't learn from the 2008 crisis. And it repeated, and what happened then and now, after the price had gone up, was to have international cooperation to agree that this is not good, right? Introducing export. And we have all the data to show that it probably led to about 10 to 15% higher price than what it should have been because of these restrictions. And it hurts the poorest the most, right? And in 2008, it was more the rice price. This time, it's more wheat, yeah? So it only impacted more the countries that were very dependent on Ukraine and Russia imports of wheat, which is a lot of the Middle Eastern countries. In the last food crisis, it was rice, so it affected Asia and Africa, and it was much worse. So at that time, what we did was, with the WTO, under G20 and so on, we agreed that we would be transparent, announce what you're going to do, have some sunset clause with it, and make sure that you don't continue the bad practices. The same thing happened this time round, where under G20 and then into the WTO, everyone agreed to the principles of when you have to do export restrictions, whether it's food or the health and medical supplies, you've got to do it in a targeted way, a measured way, and it has to be temporary, right? So but whether or how you enforce it is still an issue. The second thing I would mention is trying to compare the two situations. At that time, because it was a production issue, within ASEAN countries, because the biggest importer and the biggest exporters of rice are actually all ASEAN. So at that time, I was the trade minister in ASEAN. It happened, Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, I think. They were going to actually restrict the exports of rice. They were going to form a cartel of some sort. That really led to a jump in price. And Philippines was panicking. They said, I'll pay any price for that. So we had a meeting. Said, no, guys, you can't do this. So then we agreed and we came out with a statement. Okay, they're not going to restrict the exports. And the second thing we did, and this is about transparency, and it's about data. Actually, I wanted to emphasize the importance of data, because you have to know, how much food you have, where is it being produced, is there enough stocks? So the other thing we did was to have an agreement on stocks. It doesn't have to be physically in your country, but the ability for you to be able to access stocks when you have a shortage, whether it's a crisis, a food crisis, shortage, or whether there's a hurricane. And the one thing we did was actually get the support from the U.S. Under the WTO, this is very trade jargon, in negotiations, Japan had to keep a minimum amount of rice in Japan. That was part of the WTO agreement. So this rice is just sitting there in Japan, and we got an agreement that ASEAN could access this rice if we needed it. We never accessed it. And then we also came up with an ASEAN and East Asia agreement on food stock reserves. So I think food stock and having the data for it, having food stocks is expensive, so you don't have to actually have it. It's just the ability to access it is very important. And having the data on food production and prices and where the shortages are and what is causing it is very important. And that's why this time round, we, under the G20 and the G7, there's all kinds of things going on in the food coordination. We've come up with a food dashboard, which is getting everybody's data in one place so that you can have the accurate data for policymakers to make the right decisions and for cooperation to happen. Finally, let's not repeat let's learn from all the food crises we have. It's not just the immediate response that's important. We have to address the drivers of food insecurity, which is climate change, which is unsustainable food practices, and finally, it's not just about the food, the fertilizer issue. The trade in fertilizers is the big issue. If we don't address that now, the food production will be affected, including rice. And that will accentuate a food crisis, in maybe in the next 6 or 12 months, if we don't address the fertilizer shortages that we are experiencing.
Are you optimistic
and
that we might see something on that out of the G20?
Not in the G20. What they have done is revived some of the cooperation that they had come up with in 2008. One of them is the agriculture market information system. The other is all these agreements on principles of how you would undertake export restrictions, but enforcement is an issue. Third is, how do we cooperate on the science side, innovation side, and fertilizer is going to be a big issue, and a lot of that is natural gas prices. It's affordability as well as accessibility, and this is where I think it has to be linked to sustainable use of fertilizer subsidies that that governments have that actually are very inefficient, and they could be repurposed for sustainable practices in agriculture.
Of course, we do use gas in chemical production. Stefan, Bayer has had to deal, like many other companies this year, with very rapid decoupling. It's been Russia on this occasion. It could easily be another economy. Tell us a little bit about how that worked and what lessons you have learned as Bayer in dealing with this.
Yeah, thank you. So Let me quickly add to one of the comments that Mary made. I think the fertilizer crisis also offers other opportunities for innovation and look for new ways and innovate how to, for example, go to biological fertilizers or other means to advance here. So I think a crisis is always an opportunity also to come up with new solutions, and I hope that we can come up with some of those. But you're right. I mean, the energy crunch has especially hit companies in Western Europe. Bayer has a large footprint in Germany, manufacturing footprint, and we had to come up with alternative sourcing for natural gas. For now, the supply of gas is still, thankfully, is still there, and governments have worked hard to come up with alternative suppliers for natural gas. But what I can tell you is that, especially the chemical industry, including us, we've worked on so-called fuel switches so that we could, for example, produce steam with other means than gas, and steam is needed for many of the chemical processes in manufacturing. So we've basically readied ourselves to be completely independent from natural gas by the end of this year, so which is pretty much done in our case with alternative fuels.
So what do you use to create the steam?
You typically use oil to produce heat, and the tragedy of all of this, what is happening, and we talked about the sustainability of and what supply chains can do to sustainability. We're seeing that with all the woes that we're facing, that we seem to be betraying a little bit what the planet asks from us, and we're using more fossil fuels than ever before instead of doing the opposite. And I hope that we can come around as a planet to understand that we have to respect the boundaries that the planet sets for us.
Absolutely. Could we go back to the transparency point? Bob, I'd like to come to you. When you advise companies, and obviously one of the big issues of the whole supply chain crisis has been the unknown unknowns, that we discovered that actually out of the 90,000 suppliers, people didn't really know what was in the supply chain. Obviously problematic from a resilience point of view, also from an ESG point of view, whether climate or social and governance. How do we get around that, and how can we use this opportunity to fix that?
So let me tie together what Jin, Stefan, and Mary talked about. As you think about supply chain, and I'll call it the modernization and moving towards that modern supply chain that's going to be fit for purpose going forward, you actually have to focus on that second piece that I talked about in my opening comments, which is how are we using information better, more transparently, to make better decisions, both in terms of what's needed and also what is supplied. And this comes back to actually working across the ecosystem. Let me bring 3 examples to bear really quickly. If I'm sitting in the pharmaceutical space or the medical or healthcare space, what is really important is not necessarily the production, but actually the necessary data that should be shared more so to do the research to drive forward. So our modern supply chain has to focus on the very first start of information sharing on a global basis, so we can actually do that faster, more effective, and more efficiently as a key dependency to actually get to ultimately the production and the engagement with this 90,000 suppliers, so to speak that. Second is, how do we make sure that as we think about the ecosystem and we have sufficiency of transparency, are we accelerating the leverageability? There's plenty of examples of how to solve for some of these problems, but they're unfortunately right now very small and not leverageable across the world. And clearly, as we think about climate in particular, there's opportunity. Our own studies will tell us that the venture capital money being applied to, for example, technologies that'll help sustainability more broadly, it is very small, to the tune of less than $5 million equivalents. And yes, we're getting some upside there, but this should be multiples of that on a global basis if we can work together across that ecosystem. And the last point I want to come to, Clara, which we have not talked about yet, is how do you think about looking at the ecosystem of supply chain and not forget the labor and the social aspects that is equally important. And that's where Jin went to in terms of making sure that the societal applications of this, of the haves and the have-nots, are ultimately determined. So that point of transparency, engagement, and looking across the ecosystem at a much more detailed level is candidly the way people need to think about this going forward, being willing to do so and leveraging data, transparency, artificial intelligence, and the like to make better decisions faster and leverageable across the entirety of the world.
So data matters, but the other fuel for supply chains has long been trust. Right, trust between countries, trust between corporations. I could ask any of you, but I'll start with Liqun at the end. How do we restore the trust that has been broken over the last few years on many different levels?
You see, the outcome of this survey, I was for number 2.
Yes.
Certain reshoring, certain, but you cannot completely go to the pre-pandemic days. And so I don't think you should blame some of the countries. We would like to do a little bit more about the self-sufficiency, but don't go to the extreme. The swing fashion of the pendulum indicates that the countries need to adjust, but if you go too much, you will suffer, and probably the rest of the world will suffer. And you talked about, Robert, you talked about transparency, which I think is very much important. And because transparency covers all of these things. Are you fair to your trade partners? Are you trying to block the others? Only end up hurting yourself. All this information, all this data would help at the micro level, the companies to make their decisions, and a macro level to better design monetary policies, fiscal policies. So that is important, in my view, to maintain the confidence in this global supply chain.
Stefan, from a corporate perspective.
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity here to recalibrate and reestablish trust, and it's probably going to wind up being in that number 2 bucket. But ultimately, our goal should be more to go more towards the number 3 bucket, to the pre-pandemic, because that's what trust does, and that's what a fair recalibration will do, to do something that benefits all of us. Because we heard before, I think Ambassador Tai said, we have to have some insurance that we need to pay for Plan B, C, and D. That's probably what is needed, but that's not the optimal state that we should be in. So over time, as trust is reestablished, I hope that we can also behave more efficiently, because that's also going to be important for the planet, again.
Bob, you were about to...
I was. I'm probably more for number 1, but not because of geopolitical tensions. It's actually, we've got to radically transform because of all of the things we are talking about. And that can go to climate, it can go to the social side of the equation, it can go to the economic side of the equation. I will say that the sharing of data is usually important, but it is more important to actually be face-to-face and have the engagement and the dialogue in a big-time way. And we've honestly lost, as a world, as society, as humanity, we've lost that in the last 3 years. So the quicker we can physically get together, the break bread, so to speak, and have the ongoing conversations, as evidenced by yesterday, is the step that is super important. And the quicker we get back to that norm, the better off I think we will be as a world as we exist today.
Mary, I'll give you the last word. Maybe tell us what you think success would look like as we rebuild the supply chains.
I'm glad most people answered number 2, because I think there will be some reshaping, but not going either way, right? And I think for me, 3, let's talk about the how to. First, at the company level, agree with Bob that companies have to be adaptive, agile, and use the information, but there will also be relocation, nearshoring, and I think more regional value chains will develop. Second, what should countries do? Still the traditional policies, get your investment and trade policies right, infrastructure, connectivity, but it has to be sustainable. And being sustainable is part of competitiveness now. And sustainability is not just environment, but social and economic. And finally, nobody said anything about international rules. The WTO or regional agreements still need to play a role. Because Catherine Tai said something interesting. She said, we want to make sure China does not use non-market measures. Same thing could be said about, okay, what about the CHIP Act? And it can't be between China and US discussing this. There has to be the international rules on subsidies, on the exception for using using restrictions, not discriminatory practices, with the security clause that's in the WTO. All this needs to be revamped if we're going to have, better predictability in the way that the reality is that it's going to be there. The geopolitical considerations and the security considerations are going to be there, but we need to manage it in a way that builds trust but provides predictability. Otherwise, it can lead to higher costs. And who pays for the higher cost? Consumers, as well as developing countries who can be shut out of these global value chains.
Well, on that very short to-do list, just a few things for the world to solve. Please join me in thanking the panel very much for their insights. Thank you for an enlightening conversation.